opinions expressed on this program are the views of the host and not necessarily the views of the University of Missouri St. Louis or this station.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to another installment of That Science and Nature Show. I'm your host, Jeremy Howard, and joining me this week, as always, the Queen of Tarantulas, Becky O'Neill.
How's it going?
Microbe Master, Webster Heffern.
Hi, everyone.
And special guest and recent UMSL alumni, Kristin Ranker.
Hello, hello.
Kristin, how are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, of course. We're stoked to have you. We've had a guest last time, but that was like 2 weeks ago. But it's nice to have more guests because it gets a little lonely with the three of us. So it's always nice to have a fourth chair. So, Kristin, can you tell for the audience a little bit, who are you or who were you at UMSL since you were a recent graduate?
Yeah, so I recently graduated from the biology department with my Master of Science degree. I was in Patty Parker's lab, and I worked in several different kind of departments. So I did some TAing in the biology department. I worked for about a year in the honors college as well. Just took as many behavior classes as I could, and just kind of off doing the dog training thing now. So
awesome. Well, first and foremost, congratulations, because getting your master's, that's a huge accomplishment. So congrats on that.
Thank you. Yeah, I just got the diploma in the mail about a week ago, so it feels real now.
Nice.
I didn't really believe it even when it said it was conferred. I walked across the stage. I'm like, something's going to come back, and I'm going to find out, no, you missed this little thing. But
check didn't clear for the
yeah,
payment.
yeah, something like that. But
yeah, are you going to frame your diploma?
I am. I actually literally got the frame in the mail as I was leaving for the show today. Awesome. So yep, it'll go up on the wall, and then I'll forget about it and move on.
All right. Well, very cool. We have a great show for you today. So we're going to talk to you about magic mushrooms in the news, prosthetic limbs sensing temperature, and poop on Mount Everest, if you can believe it or not. Topic of the show this week is all going to be about animal training and dog training. We have Kristin here, who currently works at the ZoomRoom, doing dog training, so she's an expert on this. And Becky has also done some animal training with a variety of plethora of animals. Yes, Becky?
Yep, I do the dog stuff as a hobby. I like to do agility and rally with my puppers, and then I train the tarantulas and bumblebees.
Yes, so I have lots of expertise on that. But starting out with the news, so first story today comes to us from NPR, and this is all about magic mushrooms getting more attention through drug bust with this sort of psychedelic drug increase in interest. So there is this substance called psilocybin. It's kind of a mouthful to say, which is the psychoactive ingredient in magic mushrooms, or colloquially as they're sort of known, shrooms. And they're kind of on the rise in terms of people using them and sort of people growing them and distributing them and all that. And since they're not necessarily legal, so to speak, there's also a lot more drug bust going on. I believe the article talks about them increasing the amount of the amount seized by law enforcement went up nearly 500 pounds from 2017 to 1,800 pounds in 2022. So it's almost quadrupled in the amount of shrooms that we have kind of throughout the United States. And it seems like the biggest culprits, at least according to the article, is the West, followed by the Midwest. So if you're in the West, I guess people like their shrooms out here. Any thoughts initially on this?
Well, as somebody who doesn't necessarily believe that these things even should be illegal in the first place, I think it's kind of sad that the only way that we can even get to the statistics on them being on the rise is through the drug busts. It's kind of like, oh, the only way that we know that this thing is popular is because we arrested the people who are going out of their way to help others acquire it.
Okay. How about you, Becky or Kristin?
I mean, I'm kind of on the same page where I think there's a lot of things where, you know, we've made them out to be these horrible things in the past, and with a lot of things, you know, more recently marijuana, and then even like prostitution and things like being decriminalized in some areas. I think a lot of times there's this stigma around it when maybe there shouldn't be. I think there's potentially a lot of benefits to it, like the article kind of mentions that don't really get fair notice. And so I also think we should kind of spend more time investigating those and maybe have a better chance of regulation if they're allowed, but there's certain maybe, you know, laws in place that control access and things like that.
Yeah, I share similar opinions to my co-hosts today.
Okay. As opposed to other weeks where you don't.
Sometimes.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. We've had a lot of good conversations on this. So it seems like, I guess I don't know that much about the shroom scene, but it does seem like the article makes a case for the psychedelics potentially having therapeutic effects, where it's kind of acting as a treatment, like how many people with anxiety or depression use marijuana as a potential treatment. But the article also kind of, on the flip side, mentions that there's the whole idea of having like, where is it? I'm blanking on it. Sort of like not like overdosing, but kind of having like manic episodes while they're on shrooms and potentially doing dangerous things. I don't necessarily have one thought or the other. I was just kind of curious. Does anyone have any insight into like shrooms being used for medicinal purposes or treating those sorts of conditions versus marijuana or something like that?
So when people are using them for treatment in a clinical setting, you usually have someone who's like babysitting you, and it's a lower dose or very controlled dose. And then what they're describing there with psychotic breaks, I have had friends that have had this happen, quote unquote, bad trips, which if you can't tell, if you're struggling to tell reality apart from non-reality and you think terrifying things are happening to you, that is a recipe for potentially dangerous behavior. But I don't think that these dangers are so widespread compared to other drugs or other issues that people have that necessarily means that shrooms should be criminalized.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, motorcycle riding is pretty dangerous. We're not criminalizing it. I think it really should be up to the individual. But with regards to the therapeutic effects, or the therapeutic effects versus the bad trips, I've had friends who have had bad trips as well, and they always kind of come out of it. I've never seen somebody have a permanent psychotic break from something like this. I know there are other molecules out there where there's more of where the psychotic breaks are kind of more of a permanent thing once they happen, but I've not seen that happen with this. But I also feel like whether or not this could be a cause, I mean, a motorcycle can be a cause or a co-cause of you breaking your skull. Are we illegalizing the motorcycle because there's a high propensity for people to get hurt? No.
But we do have things like seatbelts and helmets and...
Yeah, so we could have the equivalent perhaps for the magic mushroom. I don't know what it would be, but...
Well, one thing with this being generally still illegal, I know there's some weird like loopholes with if you get spores versus whole mushrooms and stuff like that, but there's a lot of varieties of mushrooms that contain psilocybin, and they're going to have slightly different effects, be different doses, perhaps tweak the receptors that are agonizing on your brain just a little bit differently. So I think there's probably vast differences among species and cultivars in terms of safety and likelihood to have a bad trip and things like that. And I think we just don't have good research on which and what kind.
That would be nice research to have. Like, I want to know that I'm doing the safest version that doesn't also have other chemicals that are going to make me really sick.
Yeah, there's definitely, if you go out into the woods, there are some varieties that contain psilocybin that are also just going to make you barf a lot. So have fun. So I think there's a ton of variation.
Okay. Very cool. I feel like, again, I don't have much to weigh in on this because I just don't really know enough. But for the sake of time, we're going to move on to the next article. So this comes to us from Smithsonian. This is all about recent developments in prosthetic limbs, potentially being able to sense temperature like a real hand. So if you're human and you don't have a prosthetic or an injury, you probably take for granted that your skin can feel lots of different sensations like vibration, warmth, wetness, all of that. And a big part of that is temperature. Being able to sense, the temperature of objects you touch, and also just as part of a human component, like the human component of touch, like a hug or a handshake or something like that. Warmth is part of that. So some researchers have been potentially had a breakthrough with these devices. I believe they're called mini touch. So there's like sensors in prosthetic limbs that can potentially sense changes in I guess just temperatures, basically, yeah. Allowing for individuals to sense differences in like temperature of material, but also just like general temperatures like cool, cold, and hot as well. So it seems like they've made some good starts so far in terms of the amount of success individuals who have volunteered to take these tests to be able to sense temperature, and kind of acting as this sort of element of hope for people who lost limbs. So I thought that was pretty incredible. What did we think about this?
I thought it was what was coolest about this article to me was they mentioned that where the individual feels the sense of temperature is in their phantom limb. So I don't know if people are familiar with phantom limbs, but when people have appendages removed, they still feel like they have that appendage there. And the idea that using these temperature sensors, they can actually give the sense of temperature in that phantom appendage that the individual feels is still there is incredible to me, because I don't know back when I was learning about phantom appendages, they didn't know the mechanism. And this kind of clarifies that the mechanism is potentially via that nerve that's still there that's just severed.
Yeah, I think one of the things that really stuck out to me was that it wasn't even any fantastic technology or anything like that. It was all using like very easily to get materials, so that this is something that potentially could be, a lot of times these new things come out and they're barred because people don't have the financial resources to be able to get them. And the fact that this could be something that, the average person might be able to actually afford and use is really, really great.
Yeah, they mentioned the components were stuff you can find like in a cell phone, and cell phones are, so like they're everywhere, so the components aren't hard to find, which is like that's really awesome because when I was reading that at first, I was like how expensive is it going to be? Is again like the rich people or the people who are wealthy who unfortunately lost limbs versus like make a soldier returning home or something like that who's maybe not as well off financially. How does that work? So the fact that it's more cost affordable seems hopeful to me.
I was struck because I didn't know this that humans don't actually have any receptors that can feel if something's wet or not. What we're sensing is
That
temperature
surprised
changes.
me. That was interesting.
I
Like
didn't know that.
you can sense wetness, but only because of temperature changes, not because like it's
And maybe
moist.
texture, but
Yeah.
Wait, was that in the article?
It was, yeah.
I'm totally missed that. Yeah.
Yeah, so
fine.
apparently if you touch water, like there's no sensors in your hand that says like this is a wet object. It's just that like the sensation of water and the temperature change is how you like tell it's water or any sort of fluid.
That's really phenomenal. That's really interesting. Yeah. I guess it's just the distribution of the temperature change. You have this sharp cutoff at the edge of the bubble that you're touching. Oh, okay, this must be wet. This must be fluid that it's surrounding me.
That makes sense to me. And I also thought the interview with one of the patients was very sweet, and that all he really wanted out of this was when he walks with both his kids and holds their hand, he wants to be able to feel the kid that's holding the prosthetic limb. So I was like, oh,
Yeah, that was
tugged at my heartstrings.
That was very nice. It's one of those things where, as a sort of like full able-bodied person that doesn't have any sort of like physical disabilities or anything like that, like you take for granted those things, like being able to touch something. Like we don't think about how easy we take it for granted very easily. Versus like if you lost it, like how much I guess of the human component you'd lose in your life. So I could see people being desperate to want that back, rightfully so.
And I'm surprised that they mentioned in there that was something that they didn't think of until later, that wasn't kind of their primary goal of giving people back that like human sense of touch and that closeness they feel with people. And I remember it sparked something, and this was several years ago, so the details of it I've forgotten, but I remember there being some kind of study or something where they were trying to deal with babies, and they would have babies that were in like cradles, and this was I think an orphanage or something like that. So it was some kind of experiment where they were like handling some and not handling others, and the babies that were not being touched and held actually like passed away. Because they so needed that touch to like develop that they essentially like failed to thrive. And so that still kind of blows my mind that that's even possible, that touch can be so important to not just your emotional well-being, but actually your physical health. And I don't know if it's the same for adults since they're already fully developed, but it definitely, I think that part stood out to me because, going back to that, like that's really critical. And, how are these people suffering if they're not able to kind of sense those things in limbs that are lost? Because maybe it's one, but maybe they've lost two, maybe they've lost four, or maybe they haven't even lost the limbs. Maybe they've just lost feeling in them as well. So I think it'd be great if there's some way, which that might be much more difficult, but trying to put some of that sense back into people that are maybe haven't lost limbs, but they're paralyzed from, the neck down or something like that.
Right. All right. Well, we are going to move on to our last article in the sake of time. And this is all about, this is going to be like a more silly thing coming off of the prosthetic thing. But this is from BBC. And it's the idea of climbers needing to bring their poop back down to base camp. So the idea is this, that in Mount Everest, and as you go up in elevation, poop doesn't decompose as well. And there's lots of climbers and individuals who like to scale Mount Everest, either successfully or unsuccessfully. And that they got to use the bathroom, so they do so, and it doesn't decompose. It just kind of sits around on the mountain, and it's disgusting and gross. And it sounds like from the article there's between, 3 and 4 tons of human feces on the mountain, particularly on the highest area, like the highest base camp and up towards the peak, which is not only unsightly, but just gross in general because it doesn't decompose. So the idea is that the government is trying to sort of institute protocols to have people bring biodegradable bags with them to, bring their poop back down the mountain. So what do we think about this?
I thought whatever mix of chemicals they use in there must be incredible. It said it like instantly petrified the fecal matter and made the smell go away or something to that extent. I'm like, I wish they could put that in doggy bags sometimes.
I don't know what's in it. In a past life, I was certified to train people in leave no trace camping ethics, and this was part of it. Is pack it in, pack it out. And
Oh yeah, I'm familiar with that.
yeah.
But that was with food usually, not so much.
Oh no.
Oh, okay.
So for leave no trace, you teach people how to properly dig holes and use the bathroom to defecate, but you also go over the bags, and we call them WAG bags. I don't know why this article didn't call them that. Maybe it's a brand name, but it's waste alleviation gel.
I was about to ask what's a WAG bag. Okay.
So you can buy WAG bags here in the U.S. They're pretty easy to get, and certain national parks and other places, they're actually required if you have a backpacking permit to go into the backcountry, especially if it's like a protected watershed. You have to use the bag. So I'm super surprised that there wasn't a rule on Everest about this already, especially with climbers coming from like Europe and the US that know about WAG bags and are well trained and know what happens when you don't use them and a site gets heavily impacted. So I was kind of like, shame on you, Everest people.
Maybe
Going up there with all your money and no WAG bags.
Maybe it's the temperature at Everest. They felt like, oh, it's so cold that we have an excuse not to bother with this.
Maybe so. I know they're probably pretty hardcore about keeping weight down and not packing things down. Garbage is a problem. Used oxygen tanks is a big problem.
Well, if no one's going to make them carry their own excrement back down the mountain, then I don't know. I've seen what people do just in national, like they can't even be bothered to take their dog's feces or their trash or anything, 10 feet to a trash can. So I can definitely imagine in that kind of scenario, they're like, just leave it. Like if they're not going to make me, then.
It's just having hung out with like a lot of like hardcore mountaineers and rock climbers, usually folks are really into that, but clearly in this Everest scenario, they're not. It's like tragedy of the commons, like you were just saying.
No,
Go ahead,
were you guys saying that these WAG bags are totally biodegradable?
I don't think the whole bag's biodegradable.
Okay.
I think you're meant to put it in the trash and then it goes to a dump that has a liner.
Okay. It'd be cool if they could make it eventually totally biodegradable.
That would be cool.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree with Kristin in that unless you make people just do whatever they want. Like unless there's a penalty or some sort of, restriction or slap on the wrist, like people just trash everything, unfortunately.
So I've done the proper like hole digging, leave no trace protocol, but if I see somewhere it requires me to have a WAG bag, I'm like, I just don't need to do an overnight trip there. That's a lot.
I've never had a WAG bag. I've only we've dug holes and stuff for the bathroom, but we bury it and then and that's that.
Well, and I mentioned too that at the lower base camps they can do that, but at the upper ones, I think I'm assuming the ground is maybe too frozen to be able to
That's
dig.
a good point.
But they also made the comment that they'd be giving people 2 bags for a 2-week trip up to the summit and then back down to the base camp for essentially with the intention that the people would use each bag 5 to 6 times. So they'd have 1 bag for an entire week. And again, even with that, I think this is a step in the right direction. I think they might have some issues with compliance because I don't know very many people that'd be willing to go in the same bag 6 times and then carry it with them.
Well, those are going to be heavy if you're up close to the death zone. Like they were saying, they expect people to produce 250 grams a day. I'm like, what healthy, fibrous people are these? So, yeah, it does seem like it's going to be heavy, I think.
Yeah. So, things to think about if you ever decide to go to Everest. But also just, I think it's kind of an important reminder about that we do leave a lot of waste, and it's important to be mindful of that, even if you're not going to Mount Everest, if you're going to like a national park or your local park, or just kind of keep things, pristine and beautiful so everyone else can enjoy them. That was kind of the moral of the story I took from this article. I don't plan on going to Mount Everest anytime. So, maybe the lowest base camp.
Yeah, I guess we could plug like just the general, here's the right way to do it, even if you don't have a WAG bag. So you're going to want to dig a hole, preferably somewhere where there's some sun so it's warm and decomposes. And that hole needs to be relatively deep, I'd say 6 to 8 inches. And then you go in the hole, put any toilet paper in there, and then you bury that thing. Don't leave anything exposed for animals to eat and get into. That's how you spread disease. That's how you do it.
And with that, we're going to take a break and we'll come back with topic of the show. Stay tuned.
I've been playing Street Dive. Live on the Good Together Tour, July 16th at St. Louis Music Park. Tickets go on sale this Friday at 10 a.m., but UMSL Radio has your chance to win right now. Go over to our Instagram at UMSL Radio for contest details and your chance to enter.
And we're back, and now it's time for Topic of the Show, where we have a longer form discussion about some pre-selected topic. This week, we're talking all about animal training, and with Kristin being our guest, who is a dog trainer specialist, we're probably heavily going to focus on dogs, which is totally fine by me, because I can still learn a lot, and also from tarantulas and bees and everything else Becky trains. So I thought I would start us off, and Becky, this is probably lobbed more towards you, but can you give us a general definition of animal training? Like, what is it? What purpose does it serve? Why do we have it?
Well, I've never thought about the technical definition, but basically I would say using learning, so operant or classical conditioning to change animal behavior. But what it's for, that is the question, because it's for us. Or what do you think?
Yeah, no, I'd say the context really, really matters. So in my day-to-day, the purpose is for people to be able to live with their dogs more harmoniously. So most people are coming to seek out dog training, because they're dealing with some kind of issue. Their dogs are stealing stuff off their counter, or their dog is jumping up on people when they come in, through the door. So in that sense, it's often to, in quotations, fix that problem behavior. But prior to dog training, I actually worked at the zoo with several different species, and the kind of goal of our training there was what's called in the dog world cooperative care. So getting animals to participate in their own husbandry. So, voluntary blood draws and hoof trims and nail trims, things that are often very stressful, that you can't do to a tiger or an elephant or anything if they don't want to participate. And so your options are train them to participate and make it something positive for them, or sedate them, which isn't always healthy to do every time you need to do some of that routine care. So our purpose in that context was very different. And I would say, I'm sure for Becky, her context is very often research related. So
yeah, what we do with the tarantulas, I would say qualifies under the umbrella of cooperative care, because we're teaching them to station. So that means we need them in a particular spot, and we're measuring their heart rates. So getting a tarantula to let you measure a heart rate without anesthetizing it, that's a big ask. And then bumblebees never do anything you ask them to. So you must convince them via operant and other learning ways to get them to cooperate.
Okay. So Kristin, in your job, again, this is someone who doesn't have any experience with animal training, and I never had a dog growing up. I always wanted one, but how do you go about training a dog? Like, how does that sort of work?
Yeah, so it depends who you ask. So I'll start off by saying that there is a lot of contention in the dog training world. There's a lot of different, I'll say, views and opinions, some more based on science, which I tend to follow, being, having the background that I do, and some less so. So if you're going to train a dog, I'm going to use all positive methods. I'm going to use things that motivate them so that they want to do the things that I want them to do. It's depending on what you're trying to get them to do, things can be more or less realistic, but a lot of times it's using those things that they like. So food or toys or attention. Dogs are very social. So using those things that they like to give them reasons to do what you want them to do. A lot of the things that people want their dogs to do, like walk nicely on a leash, not jumping up to greet people, not stealing food off your plate. Those are all things that in the natural world would be pretty understandable, kind of natural responses for them to take food and hoard it, for them to, greet their friends, their social kind of pack with jumping and going to the face and things like that. So it kind of depends what you're wanting to train, but I'm going to use those positive things to give them reasons to do what I want them to do, to kind of show them what I expect. And then when they do that, reward them.
Okay.
So can I ask specifically, like, what kind of positive reinforcement would you give to prevent or to encourage a dog not to jump up on somebody?
Yeah, so it's a
Asking
combination.
for a friend, Webster.
It's a really common thing. So a lot of critics of like positive reinforcement will say you can't just ignore behavior, and that's true. You know a lot of times will tell you need to ignore problem behaviors, but it's also giving them an alternative thing to do. So what do you want your dog to do? You can't tell them what not to do. They don't really understand that. You need to give them something to do in that context instead and make that more valuable, make that a better option for them to do. So you have the choice to sit in your house all day and do nothing, maybe lay on your couch, but your boss pays you, hopefully, to come into work. And if they pay you enough, it's enough motivation to keep coming in. So that's kind of how I think with our dogs is they're doing essentially a job for us. They're our pets, they're our family, but we want them to kind of live in our world that's very far removed from what they've evolved really to live in. And we, pay them for it. So something like jumping is a very common issue. I like to teach them an alternative way to get what they want. Usually dogs are after attention in that scenario. They're jumping up because they're excited. So teaching them to kind of regulate their emotions a little, sometimes just some impulse control training with like weights or stationing, like go to your mat or go to your crate. But I'll give them, for people, they get to come up and I reward them for sitting. So if they come up and they sit, they get a treat. If they jump, I'm going to turn away and remove that attention. I'm not going to push them. I'm not going to tell them no, because those types of things, often the things we think are, punishing or discouraging are really just encouraging them more. You looked like you had a comment, Becky.
Oh, yeah. Just, I've seen so many people, they want to knee the dog or yell at them.
Yes.
Say no. And the dog is like, what a great game. And they just jump more.
Yeah.
That's interesting. So I was taught that some negative reinforcement techniques work. We trained one of our dogs where it was mostly positive reinforcement, but we said no kind of in a barking tone. And that seemed to work. I will say in this context, it seemed to work, but I'd love to hear your opinions on that.
Well, Kristin knows where I'm going with this, so I'm going to ask her. Well, can you tell us what the difference between negative reinforcement and positive punishment is?
I sure can. So it's called the quadrant. So there are four quadrants in this kind of chart, if you picture it. And I'll say positive reinforcement, positive punishment, negative reinforcement, negative punishment don't necessarily mean what people tend to think they mean. So negative reinforcement is actually using something, a lot of people might be familiar with prong collars. It's a very common one. So the idea of a prong collar is to get your dog to stop pulling. So when they have a nice loose leash, there's nothing there. If they start to pull, then something bad happens. And that keeps happening until they stop doing that behavior. When they stop, that pain goes away. So that is an example of negative reinforcement. And it's not necessarily adding anything. It can be combined with positive reinforcement to where you're also adding something, maybe they stop pulling and then you give them a treat. And that would be combining positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement. The problem with some of those, it's not that they don't work. I think anyone that's well-versed in learning theory isn't going to tell you that positive punishment or negative reinforcement don't work. But what those two parts of the quadrant do is they suppress behavior. And so especially in the context of dogs, it might seem like it's working, but it's only working as long as you have that negative consequence in place. And as soon as you remove that, the dog's going to go back to doing what they were doing before. Whereas with positive reinforcement and so the other quadrant is called negative punishment. It sounds bad, but it basically means removing something good to decrease that behavior. So a dog is jumping on you, so you're going to turn your back, you're going to remove that attention to decrease the likelihood that they're going to jump on you again. So you're removing something that they want so that they decrease that behavior, and you reward a different behavior that you want instead, like sitting in front of you.
And then I think the last one was positive punishment. So when you're adding something to the environment, like you're saying no or yelling no, or you're using, say, a shock collar to stop a behavior, that's positive punishment.
Mm-hmm.
And that's usually what people, when they say negative reinforcement, they're confusing it for positive punishment. And that's all and one other thing on punishment, just to piggyback on what you said, it comes with side effects.
Yes.
So in addition to being ineffective once the shock collar's not there, the prong collar's not there, or you're not there, we see things like displacement. So dog can't get shock collar off and they misdirect the aggression and frustration. Could be on another dog, could be on you. So whenever you use punishment like that, you're potentially risking side effects. They don't always happen. I think anyone that knows learning theory would say that, but it's a risk.
Yeah, there's definitely lots of studies, and I've read some more recently that have to do with the types of training methods used with, aggression cases in the US, and they're most frequently correlated with, positive punishment, negative reinforcement techniques. So, shot collars, prong collars, or even things like lifting a knee, which is another really common one. You're still adding something, you're adding that, potential pain of the knee to try to get them to stop. So all of those methods come with that fallout, and we often see higher incidences of aggression and just behavioral fallout with the use of those methods down the road.
Speaking of aggression, have you ever worked with really difficult, almost dangerous dogs?
It depends how you would define dangerous. So I'll say there are different levels of qualifications. This is hard because the dog training industry is not regulated in the US. So anyone can call themselves a dog trainer. You guys could go right now and start saying I'm a dog trainer and taking money from people, and literally there'd be no one to stop you, no repercussions. And some people do that, and
I'm flattered you think I could do that, Kristin, but I can't.
Well, and that's what unfortunately a lot of people do, or they use the justification of, well, I've had dogs since I was a kid. I've had dogs for 40 years. But like, I've had eyes for 30 years and I'm not an ophthalmologist. That
Right.
doesn't make me an expert on, dog behavior or, whatever it is, just because you've owned dogs or you've, worked with dogs. You really need some background. You need certifications. You need things that can prove, especially to your clients, that you do know what you're talking about, that you're using the most up-to-date methods. So with my certifications, I am a dog trainer. I am working towards kind of a step higher, which would be a behavior consultant, which is someone that's going to handle what's called behavior modification cases. So training, a dog trainer is going to handle things like obedience, general obedience, manners in the house. They're going to teach you how to teach your dog to sit, how to keep them from jumping on guests, kind of simple problems in the household, along with cooperative care stuff or dog sports or tricks, things like that. Behavior modification is when you start getting into things like aggression, leash reactivity, over arousal, just really some more kind of complex issues where it's not just the behavior that's a problem, but there's really some underlying maybe emotional issues at play. And not just because someone's a dog trainer doesn't make them qualified to take on behavior modification cases. And then kind of another step above that, you can have a behaviorist, which usually is going to have a master's or PhD in a related field. And then kind of a step above that, there are veterinary behaviorists, which are going to be vets that specialize in behavior. They can actually prescribe medications for some of those really, really complex cases. So with all of that being said, I have dealt with some dogs that I think people would be, that people would consider dangerous, but I don't take like dog aggression cases, excuse me. But I've dealt with aggression in my own dogs at home. So I do handle those cases. I have worked with, a dog that's listed as dangerous. He unfortunately bit someone's finger off trying to, the guy was trying to separate two dogs in a fight and put his hand in the dog's mouth and lost a finger over it. So I have worked with that dog, but not on his aggression case. I worked strictly on muzzle training for him so that his foster can help manage him in those situations when she has to take him for a walk. So I'm very careful, probably overly so, of what cases I take on because I don't want to overstep what I feel I should handle ethically in my current role.
Well, we're glad there's people like you out there who are overly careful as opposed to out there saying they're dog trainers when they have just owned dogs for 30 years.
Yeah, it's a problem for sure. And because the people that have done that will take any excuse to say, well, clearly you don't know what you're talking about then. But I think we're moving, especially in the Midwest, more towards science-based, positive training methods. And I think we're kind of on an uptick of people being more responsible. I'm doing my dent to try to tell people to do their research before they find a dog trainer. Make sure you're looking for credentials. Make sure you're asking those questions before you just immediately trust that they know what they're talking about.
Sorry, I was just soaking it all in. That was a lot of good info. I didn't know any of that
It's
stuff.
not information, yeah.
So I guess Kristin and Becky, you can jump in with your animal expertise. How long does it take to train a dog to do something? I'm sure it depends on what you're asking of them, but
Yeah, it really, really heavily depends on so many factors too. So what are you trying to train? How old is the dog? What breed is the dog? What's the dog's training history? How have they been trained before? What even, things like what did the mom of the dog experience when the dogs were in utero? Like those things can affect behavior.
Wow.
So what you're trying to train, how good of a trainer you are, how effective you are at communicating. And then, your reinforcement, your training methods, it's really so many factors. We have so many people come in and they're like, how many classes is it going to take? How many lessons? And it's like, look, I can give you a general idea of you're going to be here for maybe a few months or maybe a few years, depending. But, the people that put in the effort, I'll say in the long run those are going to be the ones where you're seeing changes. The people that are really trying, they're going home, they're working day to day, they're following our advice versus the people that are coming to class for 45 minutes or an hour once a week. But if you're trying to train like a trick or something, some dogs pick it up really quick, super, super quick. But if you're trying to deal with a problem behavior that your dog's been doing for 5 years, then it's going to take more than, a week to kind of undo that.
Right. Yeah, if I'm playing a shaping game with my border collie who's done lots of shaping games, so that's where he basically gets to guess what I want him to do. If it's a simple behavior, we could be done in 15 minutes. But complex multi-step behaviors could be weeks. Just depends what it is, how good I am at training the particular. Yeah, so same stuff. One thing I would add to that is you need to know, what does the finished behavior look like? Because puppies, you can get them sitting super fast, but that doesn't mean they're sitting when you say sit. It might be when you're leaning forward. So you have more work to do. And then when you move out of the kitchen to the living room, you're going to have to retrain it probably, and then to the backyard, and then out to the street. So there's different levels of how well the behavior is trained. So I think people need to keep that in mind as well.
Yeah, that's definitely a huge part. Is we hear every day, well, my dog can do this at home, so they're just being stubborn. And I would almost argue that dogs just can't be stubborn. And I usually get a lot of flack from that, both from clients and sometimes even from trainers. But I think a lot of times very frequently, they just don't understand what you're asking of them. So that generalization, or proofing, as we call it, proofing the behavior, is super important. So just because your dog can lay on their mat or do a station behavior at home, it doesn't mean they can do it in your group class. It doesn't mean they can do it at the park. It's a very different situation, and dogs are very, very context dependent. So they look at all those things, and sometimes simply taking that step back from them and asking them to sit, they don't understand what you mean anymore. So you really have to work with them to get them to understand. And a lot of times people will swear their dog knows what the word sit means. I tell them to put their hands behind their back and don't move and say the word sit. And if your dog doesn't sit, they don't know the word. They're usually responding to very subtle body cues. So standing in front of them, looking down at them, leaning in just slightly. I can usually get, a dog to do what I want, and almost always before I say any words. I don't use any language until the behavior is almost complete, and that's the hardest thing for people to pick up on. So
I see a lot of people that they'll teach their dog to lay down by putting a treat on the floor, pointing at the floor and leaning all the way over, and then they never finish it, so they can't get the dog to lay down if they're standing up straight.
Yeah.
So I see a lot of stuff like that where people don't realize that, the dog's learning your body language. They're also learning that we always do this by the recliner, or we always do this by the trash can or by the door, and they're learning all this other stuff. So
the context dependent behavior. I know we had a dog where she was wonderful. She could do everything inside the house, and she could not do a single thing once she was outside the door.
Yeah.
And she could do it anywhere in the house. And but we didn't know all these things then. I didn't think about what other cues was she picking up on. Was I saying these words with my hands behind the back? And we definitely, I think, just didn't spend enough time in busier contexts with her, making sure that she was ready to do those.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Sorry. I was going to say, do you have any advice for building from a calmer context to a busier context?
Yeah, so I'll say it's going to depend on the dog and how quickly they go from like 0 to 100. So if you have a dog that kind of ramps up slowly, then you might have the benefit of saying, okay, you can do this in the house. Now let's go in our front yard and try it there. And then when we do that, let's go on a walk and let's try it there. Then let's go to a pet store where there's lots of really exciting things. But some dogs, I've had some people that are like, I literally open the door and he's gone. Like, I touch the leash and then nothing. So sometimes you really have to break it down into these incremental itty bitty little baby steps where, maybe you just go pick up the leash and then we just work to try to keep some of that energy down. Let's do some simple behaviors. Then maybe we clip the leash on. I had some people recently, one client I told them, just open the door. If outside is too stressful, this is a dog that was more fearful than anything. I'm like, just open the door and see if they'll do those things inside. They're like, the second we step outside, he changes. Like, then don't step outside. Then what's something smaller you can do? What's a smaller step you can take? And if that's too much, try a smaller step. And in the long run, you're going to get there a lot quicker by taking those incremental little steps than you are by trying to get your dog out there and using a method that's called like flooding. So if they're really afraid of something, letting all of that just, trying to let them get used to it. It's not a great method. And I've seen that used a lot. So just break it up into smaller steps so that they have that chance to get used to it in kind of a stepwise fashion. They're not being just drowned by overstimulation, all the sounds, all the excitement, whatever it is, if it's fear, anxiety. That's how I'd start it.
So this is just me being curious question. I guess what's the most interesting thing someone has asked you to train for a dog? Like besides sit, speak. Like, is someone ever asked something that's totally outlandish? Like, there's no possible way we could get your dog to do a backflip or something like that.
I don't know. I don't think I've been asked anything really silly. Not anything that I think is. I've certainly had people have unrealistic expectations.
That's probably a better question.
But not anything that I'm like, you're crazy. This dog can never do that, because dogs can. Especially some dogs. I have a border collie as well, and they are just incredibly intelligent, so smart. And I'm kind of convinced that, I think he's smarter than me. He trains me more than I train him. He's just wicked smart. But I think, there can be things that we're not realistic in our expectations of. So if you have a dog, all my dogs are rescues. They have a history. They have some trauma. And sometimes if you're asking, a dog that maybe wasn't socialized properly as a puppy, they really don't like people. They really don't like dogs. And you're expecting them to turn into a social butterfly, then we really need to be realistic about that. So, could you get your dog to maybe not lunge and bark at every person they see or every dog they see? Sure. But is your dog ever going to run up every time they see a person and go, oh my gosh, it's another person, like, I'm so happy? Probably not. And we have some people that say that where, their neighbors are trying to pet their dog and the dog's biting at their hands and they're just like, I just want them to love it. I just want them to love that. I'm well, you might have to accept that that's not the dog that you have. Just like people are different. We have different personalities. You can change things to make them more neutral in a lot of situations, but we get a lot of people that just aren't realistic in their expectations. I think that's the hardest thing to deal with. But nothing crazy as far as what they want to do, I think.
Gotcha. We're wrapping up this segment, but I have one last question. So for any listeners out there who might be interested in getting into dog training, animal training, do you have any advice for kind of getting started in that career?
Yeah, so I kind of went about it in a roundabout way. So I started at the zoo. I, did a behavior internship there, worked for several years as a zookeeper, and loved the training so much. I wanted that to be a bigger aspect and kind of made the switch to dog training because there is a lot more room to grow in a behavior sense in that way. But I'd say there are some great places. So one place in St. Louis is called the Academy of Pet Careers. They're all positive reinforcement based. So that can be a great place to start where you're going to get some education. You're going to learn about behavior. You're going to learn about dogs specifically. But also looking at positive reinforcement places in St. Louis to see if you could shadow. A lot of times you can gain hours towards certification. A lot of places will take you on as like front desk staff or an assistant, so you can work towards accreditation, but you can work with people that kind of know what they're talking about, and you can make sure that you're getting good information. So that's kind of what I'd recommend is look at those positive reinforcement places. There's several in St. Louis. It's growing, and then get that kind of experience to see if it's something you really want to do. And then, yeah, there's places. I actually started out. So after the zoo for a while, I started my dog training career at PetSmart. It's not ideal. There are some definitely some issues with working at a chain like that, but that's how I got my experience to kind of go on to what I'm doing now. And that got me in front of clients. It got me in front of dogs. And so that is definitely an option. You want to find a good team to work for, but they are both chain pet stores in St. Louis are positive reinforcement based. So that can be a great place to get some experience too.
Awesome. All right, that's going to wrap up topic of the show. We will be right back with Outside of Science. Don't go anywhere.
The UMSL Pre-Med Society is a student organization to help all pre-medical students explore their future endeavors. We host events all semester for students to indulge in the knowledge of medicine. Plenty of events are available for students to attend and familiarize themselves with their future career path, such as blood drives, spokespersons, speaking with medical students or residents, and more. The UMSL Pre-Med Society would help pre-med students at UMSL to explore their dream and engage with other individuals within the same field. Search Pre-Med Society on Try and Connect for more information.
And we're back. Now it's time for Outside of Science, where we talk about, you guessed it, things outside of science to prove that we are, in fact, not research robots that do research 24/7, or in Kristin's case, work 24/7. So, it's been 2 weeks because we didn't have a show last week since we did the episode with me, Webster, and Brandon on wetlands. What have we been up to outside of science? Would anyone like to start?
Well, speaking of wetlands, I have a half brother who lives down in Jefferson City area, and he works with native plants all the time. This is what he does. He grows them or helps grow them in the greenhouses over the winter. He sells them over the summer. He works for, I think, the largest distributor of native plants in Missouri, and I got to go visit him the other weekend. It was really fun, and I just love talking about some of these topics with him. So I guess it's not totally outside of science, but it's nice to have somebody where I'm being social with them and then simultaneously talking about some of the topics from what we do here.
Cool. I'll take it. Anyone else want to share?
I know a lot of dog stuff, ironically.
It's thematic.
So I'm getting Wallace, the border collie, out of agility because he tends to get orthopedic injuries, and he keeps aggravating one in particular. And he's also like a Ferrari, and I think I needed a Chevy, if that makes sense to the dog people out there.
You'll have to explain that to me later.
It just means he's 0 to 60. As soon as he sees that agility ring, he's like, "Whoa, I'm amped." And it's really difficult to work with a dog in the ring that's doing that. And being a border collie, they're so sensitive to your body language. Like, we're talking millimeters. If you don't handle them 100% correctly, they're going to make mistakes. And when they make mistakes, they're more likely to hurt themselves. So I was like, all right, buddy, we're switching to rally, which is a different sport that's obedience based. And once you get advanced, there's some jumps, but it's just much calmer, and it can keep him busy, and we can keep working on his ribbons and titles. So doing that. And then my really old rescue dog, Ren, that has no hybrid vigor at all. She's a mutt, but has all the genetic problems. She has got bladder stones and hip dysplasia. So we're going to start working on a physical therapy plan to work on her hip dysplasia and get some pain management under control. So it's all dogs all the time with me outside of science right now.
Okay. What have I been doing? 2 Saturdays ago, I volunteered for MissouriCon, which is like a pop culture convention, like a one-day thing. That was kind of disappointment because I just sat at a door and checked like hand stamps for like 8 hours. And I thought I was going to be asked to do more. So I was like, oh, I'm probably not going to do this again. But the guy was really grateful that I was there because he had 3 volunteers. And I guess the other 2 thought they were going to get paid or get a bunch of free merch. So they didn't show up. So I felt a little bad, but also I felt like my day was kind of wasted. I do like volunteering though. Like I have volunteered for more fun stuff. Like 2 falls ago, I volunteered for like the turkey trot in St. Charles, and I basically got to be like a trail guy and like hold a little like inflatable turkey leg and like tell people to go like this direction. That was fun. That was a good example of volunteering. MissouriCon, not so much. And I'm not against conventions or anything. Like it was cool to be back at one, but it was like, all right, I may not volunteer for this organization again because they really did not need me. My day was kind of wasted. And then last Saturday, some friends and I had a movie night and we watched Everything Everywhere All at Once. So I heard that movie was very good. It is very good. It's also absolutely absurd.
I was going to say, what did you think?
Yeah, I pretty much what I just said summarizes it. I understand why it won all the awards and everything. Admittedly, I don't entirely understand what it's about. I think it could be about like 5 or 6 different things, like thematically, which I think is what makes the movie interesting to talk about, is what I'll say. But if you
fair.
haven't seen it, I would definitely recommend it. How about you, Kristin?
Very similar to Becky. Most of my life outside of dog training is dog training with my personal dogs. So we also, with my Border Collie, we compete in agility. So we've been doing lots of shows. We're just at novice level. We're just starting.
Nice.
I completely understand what you're saying about like handling and everything. I'm so worried that he's going to hurt himself, but that's what I got him for. So we're going to do our best to stay out of some trouble, but we've done a little bit of rally. Any time off I have, I'm spending with my dogs or my bird. I have a small parrot as well as 4 geckos and like to garden and stuff, but hasn't been too much of that with the cold and everything. So I'm excited for spring to get some of that back up.
Yeah,
and going.
it's right around the corner. All right. Well, that's going to wrap up another episode of That Science and Nature Show. Thank you so much for listening this week. Thank you, of course, as always, to Webster and Becky for joining me. And thank you to you, Kristin, for joining us and talking about all the cool dog training stuff that you do. It's been awesome to have you on.
Thank you. Yeah, I will talk about dog training all day, anytime. So
Cool.
good to be here.
Remember, you can find past episodes of That Science and Nature Show on Amazon and Spotify, no longer Google Podcasts, because I was told they pulled the plug on that. So you can't go to Google Podcasts, go to Amazon or Spotify to find past episodes. Until next week, you've been listening to That Science and Nature Show. My name is Jeremy Howard, and we're out.